Hello, crowd. In this episode, I talked to Benjamin Kamp, design and product manager working in the lighting industry. He shares with us his journey and experience developing products and how he and his team approaches taking each idea to a successful product. Cool. So I'm here with Benjamin Kamp, also known as Ben. He's a product designer. We just chatted before. 15 years of experience of industry experience.
Yeah, coming up, I would say.
Yeah.
Now.
You will definitely do a better job than me in introducing yourself. So, what would you say your journey has been so far?
Well, I'm a son of a farmer, so I started out as a farm boy. And originally I was going to do agricultural business at university, and I did a year of that. And realised I wasn't really into it, and that's when I switched to design. I studied industrial design at Victoria University and graduated, I think, 2010, I can't remember. And from there, started out in the world. I was lucky enough to land a contract right out of uni with a company developing sustainable coffins for them.
All right.
So that was like wooden-based and also cardboard-based coffins. So that was, I guess, a shock to the system. That kind of changed my perception on death as well.
Right.
But it was a really good learning experience. It was good because I was the only designer on that, so it meant that I was kind of A to Z from working right through the concepts, through prototyping, and even to manufacturing, and as well as some of the testing for regulations and things like that. Mm-hmm. So that was a fantastic crash course in kind of designing a product all the way through. And then from there, there was a few other small contracts. At that time, I was actually working just as a contract designer, so that was my major contract, and there was a few other small contracts that I did on the side. And then about 2 years after that, I moved to Auckland, and I took over head of design for a company called Hunza, who design and manufacture high-end outdoor lighting. And they have a global market, so I was there maybe 7 or 8 years, I think, heading the design department for them. I was lucky enough to travel the world with them every year. I was exposed to pretty much every major market in the world for lighting, I guess, which was fantastic, and obviously helped to understand the nuances of different markets. So something that works for us here could be completely wrong for a US market or a Middle East market. And then obviously navigating standards and testing requirements and things. I think it seems like there's no product in the world where there's one standard that works universally for every market. So it's just, I guess, just like tariffs are kind of a market barrier, I think, localized testing and standards are just a way for protectionism of locally manufactured goods. So navigating that was great. And that was where I really immersed myself in lighting, and hence I would say my specialty now is lighting design, but I use that lightly because lighting design is its own design category. And I do see that some product designers call themselves lighting designers, but I think, to be fair, we're still product designers. If we're designing a pendant or a light fitting, we're still a product designer, not a lighting designer. And so I love lighting. It's such a complex, deep market. There's so much, so many nuances, there's so many technologies, and there's so much emotion and things that you can bring to life with it. So that also basically really immersed me in the world of So whether that be die casting, whether it be CNC machining, things like that, really helped me understand that. And then nowadays I work for a company in New Zealand called Novi, who really cool company, young company. I mean, I think the oldest person is 40 years old, something like that. So it's a really good culture. And we bridge most lighting categories within New Zealand. So commercial, residential, retail, hospitality. And now my role is probably less on the tools in terms of the nitty-gritty of designing products A to Z. It's maybe a little bit more high level, and more concept thinking and things like that. But we still get to execute really cool projects and things like that. And obviously, every stage of my career, I've learned different aspects, whether it be a design aspect, whether it be a manufacturing aspect, whether it be a interpersonal relationship aspect, management, things like that, understanding needs of entire companies rather than just the needs of the design arm of the company.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of got me to this point here, I guess. Other than that, I mean, it's been a pretty linear path that once I left the world of being a contract designer and kind of taking on jobs as they come, now I've really specialised for the last 10 years or so just in lighting, which is, I think, allowed me to really hone my skills. And I'm lucky enough now that Novi is also a CPD provider for architects, so it gives me the opportunity to go in and educate architects on lighting design requirements, standards, how to buy the space properly, how to select products for quality, things like that, which is something I've really grown to enjoy as well.
Well, I mean, you definitely have a broad experience in the whole product development for sure. What are you learning right now?
What am I learning right now?
Yeah.
I think most of what I'm learning now is it's not actually directly related to product design per se. I think once you get proficient at designing a product, it becomes almost second nature, and you know how something goes together, you know how you can tweak it. I think what I'm learning these days is more about how to enrich those products through really good validation. And I think that validation is being out there with your customers, with the users of the product, and really feeding that back in. It allows you to spot better opportunities. It allows you to take a product and maybe modify it to better suit its purpose, or actually be a little bit ahead of the game in terms of seeing trends or spotting trends that haven't quite been maximised yet, and then obviously pushing your product direction to kind of work into those niches. And obviously each time you enter a new segment of the market, there's always a massive learning curve, because there's always the face value of that market, and sometimes looking from the exterior, it looks like there's a really big opportunity, but when you actually grind down into something, you start to realize that maybe the opportunity that you first spotted is actually not an opportunity, or there's a reason that particular segment of the market works in the way it does. So I think my biggest learning at the moment is more at a business development level, maybe more so than a product level, and then also understanding how that business direction and development then feeds back down into products.
Yeah.
I think as designers, we're always told, and I think the dream is that we come up with a product and that drives the direction of the company. But in reality, that's not often the case. And I think understanding that and seeing how those two arms of the company, which I mean the business side includes sales and all of that, how those two working in unison can really actually produce a sellable product. I mean, the ultimate in design is to design a polarizing product, right? So it's something people love or they hate. But in terms of commercial viability, that is a big risk. And in reality, our job is to be dreamers, but it also is to be realists. Our company doesn't go from zero to hero built on ideas. You still have to execute and produce something that people want to spend their money on, especially in this market. Obviously, with financially things getting tighter, I think customers want honest products. Value, I hate to say value for money, but I use value for money not in a budget sense, but in a sense that it really does its intended purpose well. And, they feel comfortable and they don't feel ripped off handing over their money for that product because, it does what it's supposed to do and it's honest about what it's supposed to do. And I think that is the ultimate goal for me as a designer and I think as for any company now developing a product is a product that satisfies all the needs of its customers to the best of its ability. And, when they spend their money with you, they're getting a great result, I guess. I don't want to be developing products that are fly by night and, promise the world you take the money and then, that's that, I don't think that's a great mentality for any company or product development.
Yeah, I mean, I really resonate with what you're saying. I mean, because I completely agree with your experience. I've certainly experienced the same thing myself in my professional career, because this space is about educating the wider public or potential product designers that want to get into the industry or even creators or people that have an idea of a product. And we all need to understand that it's not just about the design, it's about making a viable business at the end of the day, because otherwise people need to eat and feed their families and such. So what you're essentially talking right now to me in my ears, I mean, you can correct me if I have a different definition, it's the product development process. I mean, and for me, the product development process is not just about the product, it's also about making it viable economically. Would you agree with that, or would you call it something different?
Absolutely, I would agree. We've actually rewritten our, I guess what we would call our NPD cycle a few times. And where we're at now is we try to spend a lot of time in validation before we even put pen to paper kind of thing. So we identify new product opportunities in a couple of ways. Either through research, that might be trends, and then also it could feed in from any other part of the company, and we would call that opportunity. So there's a project that has an opportunity for a particular product. We take that, we scope it out, we frame it up, and then we will try and validate to the best of our potential. And validation isn't easy. It's not just Googling to see who else makes a similar product. It's going out and talking to your customers, talking to people who might specify that product or use that product and really understand their needs. And if there are similar products, what are the advantages and disadvantages? And taking all of that back and feeding that in before you even start the development process, because that's going to better inform your product. And it sucks because as a designer, as soon as you have the idea, you want to develop it, but you actually spend more time in development noodling if you don't have that validation, and that's where you run the risk of not quite hitting the mark. And there will be times where you have to be able to accept failure with a product at any stage. It could fail in the concept stage, it could fail in the validation stage, it could fail in the development stage, or it could fail in the actual launch market stage. So understanding that you're not going to hit the mark each time, but I think really taking that validation helps you to better position that product and make informed decisions through development, and hopefully at the end, obviously, produce a viable product. And a viable product is not something that necessarily sells 1 million units. It might sell 1 unit, but it might be the exact right fit for that job. And obviously, you know, if you're selling 1 unit, it's probably going to be worth a decent amount of money. But viability is not, it's not making something into a commodity necessarily. It's making a product that does what it is supposed to do at the end of the day. And that's where, you know, I think businesses are successful with their products. And validation, I think this is an important point of stress, especially for younger designers, I would think, is it's not actually you so much. It's talking to sales guys, it's talking to project managers, it's talking to the accountants or whoever might have a stake or might have just like that beautiful little nugget of information that really sets that project apart. And I think so often design is siloed from other parts of the business. And so the more of a business you can get involved in the validation stage, the richer your result. And there's always going to be compromises between all of the different departments, but it's, if you have the information, you know where you can compromise or where you should hold. And that at the end of the day is going to, I guess, produce viable products, however we want to define them as a viable product or a good product.
So
hopefully that answers the question.
No, yeah, certainly, yeah, for sure, yeah. So it's really interesting because you know you're getting ideas from your market, and then you're looking into trends. Also, you know, internal conversations within the business, and you said you have like a set of documentation that kind of like frames that idea. And then you go and validate it, right? So how long does the validation normally take for, you know, in your case?
We kind of have two kind of ways of doing it. So we have like what we call lightning round, and then we have like a full development cycle. Lightning rounds, it can be quite quick because that's usually generated by a live opportunity. And usually a live opportunity is almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense because the opportunity there, the validity of it is somewhat framed up. And so that might be a project where it is commercially viable to do this one-off, and then the validation is like, cool, if we can do this, that's X amount of dollars. So that in itself validates it. Where we might kind of add the icing on top of that is to be like, well, if this project needs X, how many other projects would this kind of product be, what's the word, like relative to or you know, like the right fit for. So that's where you can maybe take a lightning round product and say, cool, this is great for this particular opportunity, but there is scope outside of this opportunity and we can build that into a mainstay item. So that can happen really quick. And almost, I say, the opportunity itself is almost self-validating. When it comes through something where we would do a full development cycle, that might be like a new product range for us, validation can take a lot longer, especially if it's in a new market sector. And it's kind of like saying, how long is a piece of string?
Right.
But at the end of the day, there is, you know, metrics that we will have to hit for the company. So we might allot 2 months for validation, or 3 months for validation, or 3 weeks, depending on the scope of the project, which we try and frame up early on. But the more times you can spend in validation, the richer the product, I think. And validation doesn't have to stop when you move into development either. Validation, you kind of want to get the bulk of it done up front, and then you can continue to run it simultaneously through development to help add in and make informed decisions through development. So kind of going back to my statement about, you know, the excitement to get to the development stage, it's just having to manage that, I think, early on to really burrow down and really discover what's the right direction and what is the commercial viability of the product. If it's X, we might make this decision. If it's Y, we might make this decision. If there is no commercial prospect for it, let's just cut it and pick the next project to work on.
Mm-hmm. Would you have like a pro tip I can quote you on, or like product validation?
Tip?
Yeah.
Pro tip is talk to as many people as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's not complicated. It's literally conversations, and also don't assume that someone who is in a field that you would think is completely irrelevant to product design doesn't have a good idea or a good little tidbit of knowledge. I don't want to bag on accountants, but let's say most people wouldn't assume accountants have a good idea in terms of validation for a product. Mm-hmm. But you cannot ignore that because it can be the simplest statement in a conversation you have with someone that can completely alter the course of a product for the better. Mm-hmm. So I would suggest talk to anyone and everyone you can, and don't discredit someone's experience or silly question or whatever, because that could be the one thing that takes that product from good to great.
Mm-hmm. And do you have like a preferred approach when you're having these conversations? What's your strategy, I guess?
It has to be organic, I think. Different people and different sectors of business and markets will respond to things differently. Mm-hmm. And so the most important thing is keeping the conversation flowing. And I think also not shutting down an idea if it seems silly. You just want to be a listener as much as you can. You can prompt, I guess, but ideally you let them talk, because when they're in a flow, that's when you'll probably pick up on something. I prefer, obviously, if I can, to be in the conversation rather than it secondhand or digested by someone first and fed through, simply because I might focus on something different in a conversation to the other person. Obviously, that's not always viable, so really fostering a good relationship with sales and people who are at the cold front of business, they might not understand the product development so much, but they understand their customers. Yeah. And I think, the relationships they have and things will sometimes get information that you might not get yourself. Mm-hmm. So I do prefer to do it myself, but I think also developing trust with the other people you work with, so all of you work together to mine that information, I think.
Yeah. So communication, I guess, is essential in that regard. You touched on a really interesting subject there, because when you are present, you listen to a certain message, but another person might be focusing on a different piece of information within that same message.
Yeah, totally.
So how do you ensure that you're getting the full the whole information when you're having this conversation with other people, so that you are better prepared to develop the concept?
I think work in teams.
Yeah.
Two sets of ears are definitely better than one, and I also think trying to foster the relationship with the person you're having the conversation with, because that then allows you to email them or give them a call and be like, hey, it was a great conversation the other day. We talked about this. Can you just remind me X, Y, Z, or what your opinion was on this? So, building that relationship does allow you to go back and forth and continue. And there is this really beautiful thing that happens, I guess, when you talk to people and you get more people involved, is everyone starts to take ownership of it, and they all start to get excited by it. And I think that, feeds in. As designers, it's a trap that we want to own the design and we want all the credit or whatnot, but in reality, a great designer doesn't care about the credit. They care about the end result and a great product. So the more people you can collaborate with, or the more you have in a team, and the more those people have a sense of ownership, the more excited everyone in the company is going to be about the particular product. But also, I guess the more information you have feeding into to making a better product. There, another hot tip: do not be precious about your design. Like whether it's your idea or someone else's idea, and you do 95% of the work. All design is collaborative. We're all drawing inspiration at some point. So to become precious about your design is not going to help you, and it's not going to help your relationships with other people. So definitely don't be precious with your designs. And also, if they have to be modified, they have to be modified. You know, like sometimes that modification is necessary to go back to the viability, even though. Personally, you might think it's the stupidest thing, or it totally compromises what you feel is the essence of the design. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to make it a bad product at the end of the day.
So yeah, that's really amazing. I mean, I agree with that as well. You know, it's just also that's something that I found, because at the end of the day, I don't have all the answers either. So you know, they have to come from somewhere, and if you're not willing to take them, then it's pretty much pointless having those conversations. So I know we delved a lot into the validation stage right just now, but I think it's really important because you give such a focus right now, because you know that even if it's a quick lighting product, like you call it, it still needs some sort of validation, so that it's not time wasted at the end of the day. So how do you turn those validated ideas into a physical thing? You know, like what sort of documentation, or what tools or frameworks do you use to have all these conversations turned into a physical thing?
So obviously documenting all of that information from validation is critical, and we usually would try and dump that into a doc. And then we would review it as a team to kind of sign it off. And then from there, that's when we move into a development stage. From that validation, we would probably start writing ourselves some parameters. So it needs to do this, it needs to do that. You know, this is maybe a price point we want to hit because we think that's where it'll fit in the market. And you start writing out your set of, I guess, more physical manifestations of the ideas, and from there it moves into development now. And with inside development, there's aspects of manufacturing, there's aspects of componentry selection, there's aspects of shipping, there's all of the and testing, I guess, would be the other big one. So starting to think about from a product level, what components do we need to achieve something. How's that going to be housed? Who's going to manufacture that? How is it going to be manufactured? And how we're going to test it, and for what markets we will test it for, and then move it through into production. And obviously there's, the generic things like prototyping and all of that, which is, I think, at the end of the day, it's a given. Any development is, from concept. And I say concept of the actual realizing the product rather than concepts which are maybe more up at the scoping initial phase. This is like, these are tangible product concepts. And then obviously that's when you'll prototype and things like that, and you'll test components. See in the lighting industry, electrical components. There's a whole lot of factors to consider, like heat management, lifetime of those individual components, what's going to be the failure point, the degradation of those components. So considering that, and that will also inform testing. And we might do some kind of performance testing early on, but as we develop the product and whether they pass or fail, we might then modify from there. And then obviously the final testing will be your electrical standards type of thing. Or if it's, let's say you were developing a car seat or something like that, your final testing would be your accreditation for safety ratings and things like that. So there's testing all the way through. There's the physical product testing, and then there's the testing to make sure it meets the requirements of the particular market. Again, it's pretty hard to put an exact way we move it from the theoretical validation to the physical manifestation. But I think, having a really nice, succinct validation data set, and then from there, writing out your parameters. And with your parameters for that product, you might have the must-haves, you might have the nice-to-haves, and you might have the things that it definitely can't be. And then taking those set of parameters and building your product from there. And it starts to become a pretty nice linear path from there, because you might, there's always experimentation with shape and look and things like that. But for me, and I totally understand that this is not all industries, but in lighting products, I'm not a pendant guy. I don't care about a decorative pendant. I care about functional lighting, which is what the ultimate goal is the effect of light within a space, how we're using light to paint a space. So our product shouldn't be the focus. The emitted light should be the focus. And so it becomes quite linear, because, our product focus becomes very simple in terms of its execution of its aesthetic. It should be blending into the fabric of the space. It shouldn't be the focus of the space. And that's another place that I think that gets tripped up, and certainly within lighting, I don't have time for decorative pendants. I get them, and I get that they are a sculptural piece and things, but trying to light a whole space with decorative pendants, not cool. What we should really be doing is celebrating the space itself with the right application of light. And I always say, let's use light, treat light like paint. It's as important as paint in the space. So, architects, interior designers, people doing their own home, they focus so much on the colour of the paint, and then the lights go in at the last minute, and they are just some cheap, crappy thing. But there should be as much consideration in the way we're putting light around that space, because that's how you view the world.
I really like that, because I never thought of it that way, but you're actually painting this space, I guess blending the space with the light. So it's a beautiful way of thinking about it.
Yeah. So I guess taking it back, for us, when we're in the development stage, at least now with Novi, it was different with other companies that I've worked for. It's more important about performance and the effect of light we're getting and packaging that up nicely than it is about making a pretty object. Obviously, we don't want our object to be butt ugly, but we just want it to be functional and just blend into the space. And so that becomes quite a clean, simple aesthetic, which also makes that part of the development pretty straightforward. We don't have to spend hours, noodling over the dimension of a radius or something, because it's just about make it manufacturable, and the important thing is the way we're controlling it.
Would you say, would you agree with this statement that for industrial products, or mass manufactured products, is it best to focus on the experience or result of what the product is conveying rather than the actual product? If it's not an art piece, would you say that's a fair?
I would tend, within limitations, for sure. I do think that often, and this is again my experience, this is not blanket statements, but sometimes through design we can lose the actual purpose of a product because we're so involved in the design of the physical thing. And it's easy to lose sight of what it's actually supposed to do at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, it's going to be probably judged on its ability to do its function, not the organic shape of a curve. Unless you are in the decorative realm, obviously, where it is an art piece or a feature piece, or it is adding a visual element to a space. When it is a functional type product, if we lose sight of what it's supposed to do, it's probably not going to be a successful product. So I think always focus on what it is the product needs to achieve at the end, and work that back through your decision. And the other aspect, it's not quite relevant to maybe this question, but another thing that I've learned along the way is don't over-design the product before manufacturing. Work as close with your manufacturers when you are designing something. As an example, CNC machining products. We can design something in CAD, whether it be SolidWorks, Fusion 360, whatever, and we can noodle it all day. And then you can give it to the CAD manufacturer, and they might just be like, how the do I actually manufacture this?
Yeah.
Or, we can make this, but it's going to take 3 times longer.
Yeah.
So, especially with Hunza, who CNC manufacture everything, what I used to do is I would rough out the model to relative dimensions, fit the relative components to what I need and the relative shape. Then I would talk with the CNC guys who are actually going to manufacture this, and I'll be like, what do I need to change to make this more efficient?
Mm-hmm.
And they might say, if you change these radiuses from 1 mil to 6 mil, we can come in with a bigger cutter.
Yeah.
We can cut that slot out in a minute, there's 10 minutes kind of thing. And working with them to really refine that, and this is the same for any type of manufacturing, back and forward with them early on helps you create a more manufacturable product. Yes, you will make compromises in the sense that you've decided this needs to be the tightest radius here, but it actually just puts a different parameter on your design, and sometimes that challenge actually pushes you into a result that at the end you like better, but you've obviously made it efficient and easily manufacturable. And I think I can't stress that enough, is work with your manufacturers as much as possible. Don't design something out 100% and then hand it to them and say, make this. You'll either not get the results you want, or it'll be something that'll be extortionately expensive. So the sooner you can get that involved and integrated into your designs, obviously, the smoother everything runs.
Would you involve the manufacturers in the validation stage, or is that something you do in the concept?
Potentially, yeah. Depending on the project or the product, there's absolutely the scope for a manufacturer to be involved here as well.
I think that's another pro tip right there. Just just rough out a design and talk to your manufacturer and see what you can change, because that's a really good approach.
And I mean, there's probably, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's many examples of industries that have had stuff manufactured a particular way, always. And then, if you were embarking on a new project, talking to manufacturers and finding out what capabilities and how you could approach manufacturing a particular product in a completely different way is a great way to create something new and potentially better suited for the end client.
So, just based off your experience, if we're not talking about a lighting product, what's roughly that design stage or your concept design stage?
Time-wise?
Yeah. Just average. I know it's different, but
I would say 3 to 6 months, something like that. I mean, there's always going to be projects that people will expect it to be turned around in 2 weeks, and that might be fine if it's a super simple thing and it's not taking a lot of brain power. But I think it's good to not stress your design stage. I know in this world where new products, I mean, there's a new iPhone every 6 months and things like that, and the consumerist aspect of things, there is economic pressure, I guess, to produce things quickly. I would tend to say if you can slow that process down, it does give you more time for continued validation to feed into it and more experimentation. And I think it de-risks as well. Obviously, if you rush something, you might not have tested it to X, Y, Z, and you don't want to have failures when it's launched. So 3 to 6 months maybe, and if it's a complex project, I mean, it could be 2 years kind of thing. But from my personal experience, it might be 3 to 6 months for a product. And a lot of that time can just be manufacturing prototypes, waiting for them to come back. So having 2 or 3 projects running concurrently is great, and if they're all in different stages, so you might have the first one going and you're waiting on prototypes. While you're waiting on prototypes, you can start the concept phase for the next one. So it's the classic Gantt chart scenario and staggering things, because there's no point of sitting around for 6 weeks waiting for something when you could be working on something else. So yeah, a lot of design time is prototype time. Obviously 3D printing is shortened that for some products, but when they're large products, it doesn't necessarily help. And another hot tip, don't rely on 3D printing to solve your problems, because it is most likely it's not going to be manufactured in a 3D printing way. And so it's best if you can move into prototypes that are manufactured in the same way it will be manufactured as early as possible, because that's when you solve a lot of the problems. 3D printing is great for little widgets, and it's great for, a bit of form and things like that. But you cannot solve manufacturing issues with 3D printing unless you're going to 3D print the whole product, which is not quite viable these days. So the sooner you can move into production type prototypes, and I say that not as in a final prototype pre-production, just producing the prototypes in the way that it's probably going to be manufactured. And that's where that communication with your manufacturers also is gold. Because you solve a lot of the problems there, you can rejig it ready for production.
So once you've got a manufactured product that's been tested, has the compliance done, and you've gone through the, assembly checklist just to make sure that you can actually, it's easy to put together and, a package and shipped and stuff. How do you approach the launch stage? Because, that's a big piece in that, you've done all this work. How do you approach it?
I'd say classically I've been really bad at that.
Right.
I've also had the advantage that, especially with Novi and Hunza, my previous job, we already had a client base. So pushing a new product out doesn't have maybe the same flamboyant launch as like a new car kind of thing, because at the end of the day, the product is doing a job or it's solving a problem, and pushing it out to the people that it's relative to has just been classically how we've done it. Novi, we have almost like a cheat, is because we have 4 in-house lighting designers who's design the light for spaces and spec the products. We have a really nice segue from a product that solves a problem to them speccing it into projects and getting it into market. But yeah, classically it's basically just an internal launch to the company, and then the sales and marketing team, there might be some social content around it and things like that. But it's getting the product in front of the right people. So whether that's an end user, whether that's a specifier, and I think stressing the problem it solves. I'm still a massive fan of people actually experiencing the product in person. I think in this day and age we do a lot of like fancy online releases and we really jazz it up, but at the end of the day, putting a product in someone's hand and them experiencing it is still one of the richest engagements I think you can have. We all see, the latest gadget and it looks really cool, but no, I don't think anyone is genuinely sold just off the launch. I think that maybe if you're an Apple or Samsung fan, you've already had experience with the previous product or the one before, so it's not a big stretch. But I don't think there's many people who see a launch for a product they've never had an engagement with and been like, I'm sold on it. They probably still want to have that tactile engagement with it. So personally, I'm probably a bit removed from that these days, but having the sales guys go out and do it, having the marketing kind of back up just for people to be aware of it, and obviously, as aforementioned, being able to specify our product into projects is a massive advantage. So yeah, it's not like we host events or anything like that. I think at the end of the day, products should speak for themselves and find their way into the right hands. But that's just my experience, and obviously, you can use Apple as a prime example. Nobody knew they needed the iPod till it was released.
Yeah.
And then it changed the whole generation. So there is a time and place for that kind of stuff. But I think when you have a specialized market like I've worked in for so long now, it's a little bit different.
I mean, every industry is different. So, I'm just kind of like trying to understand what your approach. And I guess, and then the final stage is, like your post-launch, like your after-sales service. How do you implement that into the product design?
So I think the very first thing for post-launch is it's not often that a new product is launched and it sells like hotcakes off the shelf, especially a technical product. There's a market reception period, you might want to call it, or a market validation period where the product lives in the market for 6 months or a year, and then you might start to see an uptake in its sales. And that, I believe, is obviously something new, something people haven't used and they're going to use for a long time. They want to see it in the market. They want to see other people have used it to have confidence in the product that it's going to last. Especially when you have products that are being specified by engineers and things like that, where there is liability involved. Yeah. So it's like a lag period almost, where you can launch it, you might get a bit of over the launch, and then there might be a cooling off period where people just want to see it going into projects. Yeah. And once they see it around or they've heard about it from a few different sources, then they start to trust the product. And I guess as a business, outside of design, it's about the business championing that product to make it through that cool off or lag period, I think, to make sure you can get it into a few projects and be really good at pointing the finger at those projects to kind of get the groundswell going, I guess. And once that snowball starts, then it usually grows and grows and grows. But yeah, I think that's quite often quite disheartening, I think, for people because you always hear about the success stories of somebody design something in their garage and they become a multi-millionaire overnight, or 100 million units sold or whatever. That is the exception.
Yeah.
Generally, I think people can have a great idea and a great product, and they launch it and it just simmers for years, and then finally all of a sudden it explodes. And I think it's making sure that you understand that there's likely to be a lag period with product, and just be good. If you know it's good product and you know it's solving the problem and it does what it needs to do, just be good at pointing the finger and just pushing it and trying to get it into places that will help validate it for your customers. I think that's important, and that's probably as much as I can give you in terms about post. Obviously, all products have a life cycle as well, and depending on the category they're in, some of those life cycles are longer, some are shorter. If you look at outside of design and you look at business strategies and things, you have products that are your cash cows and you have your dogs and all of those, and effectively, reviewing your products and seeing where they are, where their growth is happening, and then where they're starting to cool off. Sometimes you can revamp that product. Look at cars, they facelift it every 5 years or something like that. That might be you just have to upgrade some components because the industry's moved to a better chipset or something, because that particular product has been commoditized, that technology has been commoditized, and so more people are offering it. So it's whether you upgrade or you scrap and you start again. So monitoring those kind of life cycles. I think originally here we were thinking 5-year life cycles for products. In the last few years, we've probably seen 3 years before we're starting to see the product outdated in the market. Might still be selling well in certain segments, but you might start to see, hey, our competitors are actually offering at a similar price point something that has better tech in it. And then you kind of start to know, okay, we might need to start looking at either a revamp or a complete rebuild of this product. So yeah, I think post-launch, it's about being good at promoting it and sticking to it if you know it's a good product, and just as much as it sucks, hang in there. Especially if it's a one-off product that you've just launched and you've built a whole business strategy around it. And then also on your products that are existing in market, keeping a finger on the pulse to understand when they need a refresh, or they need to be, you can cut them, because products get to the end of their life and there's no point of flogging a dead cat. You may as well cut it and put your time and resources into something else.
Yeah. So did you have any final comments or recommendations for product developers out there? Not necessarily, like they're not necessarily trained, but if anyone wanted to.
Yeah, totally.
To do that.
I think the number one thing that's pissed me off my whole design career.
Yeah.
And some people say, and this is more for people outside of product design or classically trained, is I'm not creative, I can't do that. I think everyone has a creative spark. It might not be what we consider classically creative as an artist or as a designer, but you might approach sales in a different way to everyone else. You might package product in a different way. You might shift numbers on a Excel spreadsheet in a creative way.
Yeah.
I think everyone has a creative ability, and I think it's sad when people say I'm not creative, because most people are creative. It's just not in a classically creative field.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if people really think about that, I think it can really help them. If they want to develop a business or a product or service or whatever, just remembering that there is probably something you could look at that you do that is a bit nuanced and creative in itself, and build on that, because that's what's going to make you special. And then the other point I think we've kind of stressed the whole way through is collaborate as much as you can. It will make a richer product, and don't be precious about your design. If it has to change, it has to change. Celebrate the people who work in it. The thing that pisses me off, and I'm not going to name names or anything, but when you have these well-known designers who claim every design is theirs, even though they have a team of 10, 20 other people who are helping them execute. I think, sharing the love and accepting that it's a community thing, it's not an individual thing. All design is community, whether it be you at the concept end, whether it be the manufacturer or the guy shipping it out to the customer. It's a community that gets that product into the hands of the customer. And so accepting that and celebrating that.
Oh, those are really really good words of wisdom. It sounds like from the community to the community.
Yeah, and totally.
That's
Our job is to enrich lives, really, or make lives easier or better at the crux of it. So, we should be doing that as much as we can.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Might as well. Oh, sorry, there you go. Keep going.
One other thing. Make products that last.
Yeah.
We're so ingrained as a society at the moment in terms of we want the new thing, which inevitably forces products to be made out of cheaper, short-lived materials. Design products that last. If you can use glass, use glass. If you can use metal, use metal. Not everything sustainable is cardboard.
Yeah.
If you can make something that lasts 20 years without needing to be replaced, that in itself is sustainable. If you're not putting 5 things into a landfill in the time that one product lasts. So yeah, just build stuff
that lasts. Yeah. And it's easily repairable, I guess, as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Serviceable.
Yeah.
Make it serviceable. Yeah. Like not being able to change a battery on a phone.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm not going to take more of your time, but thank you very much. That's been really enlightening for me, especially, what I've learned is, I knew about validation being, really important. You can actually save time if you really delve into that perspective initially in the project. So that's my takeaway. But I'm sure,
it's not
other...
sexy,
Yeah.
It's not sexy. As a designer, it just doesn't feel sexy to do validation, but it is good.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you very much. I like I said, I really enjoyed it, and I hope we can catch up in the future.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and great that you're doing this. I think it's awesome, and the more we can share with everyone outside of the design community, I think it's fantastic. So, also, if you want to reach out, man, like I'm always open to this kind of stuff. I think the more knowledge we can spread, whatever industry it is, the better. So, yeah, totally.
Cool. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully chat to you soon, eh?
Thank you for listening to Resolve by Creolab. If you would like to know more about how to turn your product idea into a successful reality based on industry interviews, best practice, research, and your feedback, follow this podcast and my socials for the latest content.